You're listening to the Mind Over Murder podcast.
My name is Bill Thomas. I'm a writer, consulting producer, and now podcaster. I am now trying to use my experience as the brother of a murder victim to help other victims of violent crime. I'm working on a book on the unsolved Colonial Parkway Murders, and I'm the co-administrator of the Colonial Parkway Murders Facebook group together with Kristen and Dilley.
My name is Kristen and Dilley. I'm a writer, a researcher, a teacher, and a victim's advocate, as well as the social media manager and co-administrator for the Colonial Parkway Murders Facebook page with my partner in crime, Bill Thomas. And of course, I'm in Virginia and Bill is in Connecticut as always. So we've got a nice little geographic representation here for today's episode. So last episode, we talked a lot about the amazing work that Othram is doing. And I wanted to start off this time by asking, what can we do? We are not genetic genealogists or DNA experts. We're podcasters and victims advocates. But what can your average person on the street do to help you guys continue your excellent work in solving cases?
We need you guys just as much as we need the DNA experts and everyone else in this process. I think the technology is still fairly new, and unless you are following it from beginning to end, a lot of people still don't know about it and don't know the power of forensic genetic genealogy and tell the stories like you guys do. You have an incredible podcast, and we're thrilled to be on it. Help tell some of the stories that are out there that may not have funding, may not have any information for. On DNA Solves, we often share some of those stories, and you guys can just share them on social media. Also, share the successes. We talked a little bit about it in the previous episode, but every time a success is shared, it gives family members hope that their story will be next. Every time a really difficult case is cracked, or one that may have been thought to be intractable in the past, it gives law enforcement hope that they can, and it gives them the sort of confidence to try it for one of their more difficult cases and share the stories. That's super important. On DNA Solves, it's easy you can click a button and share it on your social media and just have it up there. The other thing is you can help us fund cases. That's become a huge bridge to government funding. Advocate to your state senator, advocate to whomever that this technology is funded and it can be used by law enforcement in your area as a tool to progress these investigations. There is no reason why FGG should only be used in cold cases. If there is a perpetrator out there and CODIS doesn't have a hit and there are no more leads in the case, this type of technology would be incredible help in moving that investigation forward. If someone finds a body today, there's no reason for why a family would have to wait decades to find out what happened to their loved one. This technology is right here now, and it can help somebody get the answer right away and maybe start moving on with their lives.
Civilian question, can you explain what CODIS is?
Absolutely. So CODIS is the FBI database of known perpetrators that most forensic DNA testing is based on right now. You take 20 markers and you compare the 20 markers from the crime scene to the CODIS database. And if there's a match, then you're able to say that this person that committed the crime has also committed these other crimes. And so CODIS is really amazing at being able to confirm identity. But CODIS was never created to actually infer identity. And so FGG is there to infer that identity when there are no CODIS matches, when the person is not in the database. As you can imagine, a lot of victims would not be in the CODIS database. And so when you have unidentified remains, it's not often that you're able to get that hit. A lot of the perpetrators that haven't been caught in the past are also not in CODIS. Being able to infer that identity and provide that investigative lead allows CODIS to then confirm that our DNA testing is correct. And then that can be taken into court or wherever it needs to go. So it's actually complementary technology.
Carla, on the genealogy end, how can we help your part of the process? If I test at 23andMe, are you going to have access to my results? How do I ensure that you have my information available?
I'm so glad you asked that question. No, I would not have access to your 23andMe results or Ancestry DNA results. Anyone who has taken a DNA test that wants to help this mission would need to upload to DNA Solves. There's 3 databases that are law enforcement approved: DNA Solves, Family Tree DNA, and GEDmatch. So if you want to help solve these cases, please upload to those 3 databases. And also, if you are a family of a loved one, if you have a loved one that is missing, take a DNA test. Make sure your DNA test is in all the databases. Make sure you have a public family tree detailing your family and noting the person that is missing in your family, so that when we are doing research, we can find you. We can find that connection.
2 of the 3 databases that you've mentioned, the DNAsolves.com database, which is run by Othram, and GEDmatch, are both available at no charge. Family Tree DNA, who have been great about allowing law enforcement to use their database, they do charge for DNA profiling, just like 23andMe and Ancestry and MyHeritage and those databases, is my understanding. Am I characterizing things correctly, that DNAsolves.com and GEDmatch.com are both available at no charge? Is that accurate?
Unless
Okay.
Family Tree has changed their pricing structure, I believe that you can still upload your DNA to that database, and you are only charged if you want to access their tools. So anyone who is tested at any other testing company, consumer DNA testing company, can download their results from that testing company and upload to Family Tree DNA.
So there's a no charge option for all 3 of those.
That's correct.
Fantastic.
There's no charge to upload your DNA and to have it there. But if you want to research your family and you want to use their tools, then I believe they charge for that. I'm not sure what the price is at this time.
Laying this out, and again, I think this is still new, and I know this is the world that you and your teams live in. That means that if somebody has a profile from one of the other DNA consumer level websites like Ancestry and 23andMe, they can electronically upload their data to these other databases at no charge, therefore making it available to law enforcement. Because people ask us this all the time. Well, I did Ancestry. I did 23andMe. And isn't that good enough? And right now, Ancestry and 23andMe have resisted allowing law enforcement to use their databases to help solve cases, which I will say, as a civilian and as the brother of a murder victim, I think is extremely unfortunate. That's the policy decision they've made. There are workarounds with DNA Solves, Family Tree DNA, and GEDmatch. Is that a fair characterization?
Yes. If you have tested at any DNA testing company, you can upload to those 3 databases. And Family Tree DNA does automatically opt you in for law enforcement matching, whereas GEDmatch will need you to opt in for law enforcement matching.
So you have to check the box, as we say.
Yes. And DNA Solves is strictly for law enforcement. So there's no opt-in. If you are uploading your DNA to DNA Solves, it's because you want to help.
So I'm curious if you have, I'm asking for numbers again. Sorry about that if you don't have it in front of you, but can you give basic idea about how many people are uploaded it to a DNA site at this point in this country? I remember for a while, it felt like everybody was saying, oh, I'm doing my DNA. This is amazing. This is so much fun. But I know that's probably only a small percentage of people who have done it. Do you have any sense of the numbers behind that?
I can say, I believe Family Tree DNA and GEDmatch both have reported recently that they have approximately 1.5 million in their database. Now, a lot of those may overlap, because someone has tested at Family Tree DNA and has uploaded to GEDmatch. And so they could be there could be duplicates there. But I would roughly say 1.5 million in each of those databases.
Are those databases big enough, Carla, for you to do the work that you do with your team?
Yes, they are. We would like to encourage anyone that are from a minority group to upload because those are more challenging cases. But yes, that it is sufficient for us to work and build those trees and at least eliminate suspects based on those genetic matches and zero in on the ones that we should focus on, the families that we need to maybe do some target testing to help narrow it down further.
Kristin, you've said something interesting and I think provocative, which is that you'd like to offer what I will call a money-back guarantee, which is you'd like to not charge if you can't create a profile. Can you really actually set that out there as a future goal?
It's there. At Othram, we do this QC process. It's like a car inspection where when we get the evidence in, so after we do the initial review with the law enforcement agency and say, yes, we think your case is tractable to this type of technology, they send in the evidence. And then we do this car inspection on the DNA and get all of these properties of the DNA without consuming it. So you're just looking at a small fraction of that DNA. And so you're not consuming the sample or the evidence. It's nothing like the amount of DNA you need to sequence. With that, you're able to know for sure exactly the properties of that piece of DNA. Because we've run so many cases from the very beginning to the very end. I know in the beginning we had a lot of criticism on maybe trying to do every part of the process. But if you're going to actually understand every part of the process and how it fits in together and optimize it, you have to know what happens from the minute that DNA is sent to you all the way through to the end of the investigation. Because we have those truth sets and we have so many of those truth sets, what we can do now is we can say this piece of evidence resembles something we have done so many times in the past using this type of method. And so we feel confident that we can proceed. It passes QC and we can build one of these profiles. It's predictable now. And yes, we are willing to say that once we say it's past QC, we will build you a DNA profile, 100% guaranteed. If it does not pass QC or it doesn't match something we've done before, it looks a little bit different, then we put it on pause and we either go back and we do R&D. We've been like, you see a lot of these things come in and they have the same issue. For example, I'll give you a real life example. Sherry Ann Jarvis, what was left for her DNA evidence when we identified her was an FPE slide. So it's formaldehyde fixed, paraffin embedded slide that was there with her DNA. That's chemically treating the DNA. There's all these crosslinks, and it's really hard to break the crosslinks, get the DNA, and then be able to sequence and get this great picture of everything that's going on. And so it's something we had to do a lot of R&D on. There's a lot of DNA evidence that comes in that is treated with formaldehyde. Now we're able to go ahead and put those right through because we know exactly how to do it. There's a lot of cases that come in that have a very high non-human burden. So now we have genomic filtering methods and other methods that we've perfected, and we know exactly how to get those through QC. So there's certain types of mixtures, certain amounts of DNA. And so we bin the ones that we're not ready for, and then we do R&D on that type of DNA, obviously without consuming evidence. But yes, I believe, would you go to a doctor and get a procedure done if they weren't sure if it was going to work or not?
No.
Would you be like, I'm ready, give me that drug, it may work, it may not? No.
Unless I was completely out on the edge of some disease that I wouldn't want to be the experiment, Hail Mary, what the heck, you're going to die anyway case, unless that were the extreme example.
But these cases are cold already. They've been cold for a while. Waiting until the technology is there is okay. It's not like it's a live or die situation. You may try something at the very end. It's better to wait, get the technology there, and then solve that case. Because if you consume it without knowing that you're actually able to bring value, you're consuming someone's last chance of being identified, someone's last chance of getting justice for one of their loved ones. For what?
It does seem extreme. Tell us about non-human burden. When you say that, what does that mean when you're finding remains, for example?
It means contamination. So you can imagine if bones were exposed to the elements outdoors for decades or found at the bottom of a lake, and we've had bones that were found in a sewage tank. And so you can imagine that there are things there that are non-human, whether it's DNA from other animals, plants. There's just so many different things that could be on those bones that could complicate you being able to build one of these profiles.
You've got this amazing, we're just going to call it a money back guarantee because it sounds like that's exactly what it is. There are still, I assume, always going to be law enforcement agencies that are a little reticent about sending their DNA to y'all. And Bill's case, I think, is a great example. We do have some law enforcement agencies that are very resistant to taking the help that you guys have generously offered. What would you say to try to convince a law enforcement agency that's still reticent that y'all are the best case scenario for this case? FBI, are you listening?
I'm going to take David's approach here. And I don't think that we need to convince anyone to do something they're not comfortable with. So everyone's holding onto those cases. Met so many law enforcement agents that truly want to do what's best for the case. And some are truly not convinced yet that this technology is predictable. And so the only thing we can do is solve more and more cases, announce more and more cases, show other examples of cases that have failed other methods, that have been difficult to work with in the past. And then one day they're going to see that story in the news that feels exactly similar to the story that they're investigating. And they're going to say, you know what, I'm willing to give it a chance. And I think we wait for that, because I think everyone has to make the right decision. There are a lot of people out there claiming that they can do FGG, and there have been a lot of law enforcement agents burnt by that.
And so that adds to law enforcement skepticism of the field, those failures.
Absolutely. More times than not, I hear we've tried. And more times than not, they feel like they've done the most advanced DNA testing method. It's very hard to come into a field and innovate something brand new, but be able to truly differentiate yourself. Unless you can't just be incrementally better. You've got to be like 10x better or more. And it's going to take time for people to really see the difference. And that's okay.
If law enforcement sees the solves, they see, as Kristen Dilley was saying, you're announcing sometimes multiple solves per day. Carla and her team are sending back leads to law enforcement day after day, and they are solving cases. So when you're seeing that volume, look, we know and love a number of people in law enforcement, but I also understand, and I think Kristen Dilley would agree with me, it can be a pretty cynical field. Sometimes what our friends in law enforcement have to see in the cases they have to investigate, they have to harden their hearts a bit. I wouldn't be able to do the kind of work that they do. And so there's a cynicism that can creep in. How do we get past their sometimes very cynical, I've seen it all, I've done it all attitude?
I think we continue to do what we're doing. We find government support, government funding for this type of technology. That's the other issue for law enforcement. The barrier right now is hard. You can use legacy DNA testing technology with grants pretty quickly, pretty readily. You can find the funding. But funding for this type of technology is harder to come by. It's harder to find budgets. You have to make sure you get approved through the department, figure this out, figure that out before you can even test the case. Then you're not sure. So you're basically, when you go somewhere and you say, look, I want to spend this much money on something, you want to be certain. It's different from, I have a budget and I should run this type of testing. I think that it has to change from both directions. I think as Othram, we're going to continue to solve as many cases as possible, announce as many cases as possible, and scale this initiative as much as we possibly can. From the government side, we need support. They need to see what's happening. They need to see that this technology really does have a high ROI for the funding that's there. There are so many cases that have been, you hear, let's clear the backlog. There's so many cases that have been tested on the backlog, but they're still not cleared. They went from untested to tested, but now they're still not a match. That's where this technology is super powerful. You can now fund this new tool to help you get to that match. And then the original test that was already funded, that original CODIS test, can confirm the results. So you basically get the value that you've already spent for all of this sort of government budget. And I feel like they're going to see it. I have an announcement I'll tell you about for the first time on the show today. NamUs, RTI, and the NIJ are working on, you guys know about NamUs. Obviously, that's the registry of all of the missing persons and unidentified remains in the U.S. And they're working on trying to clear that database using any technology, but including FGG. And so recently we announced that they have chosen to partner with Othram to be able to use FGG to clear and identify a lot of these unidentified remains in the database. And so we are thrilled to have been chosen as their partner. We are so excited about this project because I think it'll show exactly what Carla was able to show in Mississippi in a very small scale. It's going to show that if you have a list of unidentifieds, it doesn't matter how complicated the DNA is. It doesn't matter, the backgrounds. Nothing matters. All that matters is you have this list, you have evidence, and Othram has been purpose-built just for this. We're able to take this list and get most of those to the finish line. And I think for the first time, you'll see that entire percentages of this database are going to be resolved. You're going to have identities for these victims. I think that's going to make people think twice about whether or not this should be something that's used all the time in investigations. It's hard to convince somebody when you're solving a case here and a case there and a case here. But when you do it at scale and you do it predictably and you do it as part of one project that everyone is following, I believe that's a much stronger argument.
You're listening to Mind Over Murder. We'll be right back after this word from our sponsors. We're back here at Mind Over Murder.
Carla, when you're faced with a list like NamUs, is that like daunting for you, or is that like challenge accepted, let's go?
Challenge accepted, let's go, because that was the mission of the project when we started in Mississippi. It had to do with the NamUs database. It's okay, let's look at Mississippi NamUs cases and let's get those funded and let's get those worked to see if we can clear those cases from NamUs. We were extremely successful in this project. For this to happen now, I'm so excited about it because it really shows that they paid attention and they have now chose Othram as their partner. And I really think that this is going to happen at scale across the entire database. I think we're going to see so many solves coming. I think this is a project that's going to really set the tone for the future.
I feel like if we can do this in Mississippi and you've shown this works, we just have to figure out a way as a country to roll this out to all 49 other wonderful states so that the success that you've had in Mississippi can be scalable to an entire country. And as Kristen Mittelman mentioned, 250,000 cold case homicides across the United States still unsolved.
I think that's exactly what the hope is. And I think that's what the NamUs project is. The NamUs database is everyone that's unidentified in the U.S. And so let's start tackling every single one of them. And I hope that as states start to see solve after solve, there'll be a lot more state funding coming in to be able to help us continue these investigations at a larger scale. The technology is here today to be able to handle that number of cases, to be able to predictably build profiles from all of this evidence. Carla is scaling this incredible team now so that we're ready because we see what's coming next. You guys are excited because you see the solves announcing a few times a week, like we said, sometimes multiple solves a day. But what we see is we're returning leads 4 to 12 times a day. Like we see this very different trajectory internally. And yeah, it takes a lot of time for that to be public. And sometimes some cases may never be public. We know that if we're part of an investigation, we're almost always able to return back something that is useful back to that agency. And we know that's helping a lot of law enforcement agencies across the U.S. build trust in these types of DNA testing methods that are still fairly new. We've gone from getting a case or two from each agency to getting a block of cases, all of their unidentified remains, all of their homicides that are unsolved. And that's exciting because right now they're starting to show us that they trust that this method will work for their entire backlog. And they're willing to just go ahead, put it in a request and see what happens. I feel like that's already showing the change. And that's something that you guys will see in the future. And Bill, I know that this is personal to you. And I know how much it means to you to see these cases all have every possible tool used in order to resolve them. And I tell you that as important as that is, it has to be done carefully. Because if a tool is used that consumes the DNA and it's not the right tool, it's actually worse for your case than if it wasn't used at all. That's something that needs to be balanced.
Understood. But speaking for the families, plural, all of us, at the time of this podcast, we've just crossed over 36 years waiting for answers. And I know how difficult that can be for people. I do understand the balance, and I very much appreciate the reminder that we have to do it right, because our friends at the FBI and the Virginia State Police, they do push back sometimes when the families get impatient, and we're lobbying for the use of this technology and for moving our cases forward. It gets hard when it's 3 decades plus, but at the same time, I see you solving cases that are 40, 50, 60 years old and older. You're definitely proving that it can be done. Patience is sometimes difficult.
I understand.
When you have this list from NamUs, how are you going to, maybe not even prioritize, just how are you going to start? Are you going to start with oldest cases first and work your way through? Or like, what is the plan? Or do you have a plan yet?
NamUs, RTI, they're going to decide which cases they are going to send to. We don't have to make that decision. The only decision we make at Othram is the DNA evidence trackable. If a case is entered into request and when we receive the evidence, we do that QC process that I talked to you about. And if it's tractable, then we run the case. And so that's the only decision we ever look at when working through these types of cases. And David is incredible at trying to figure out how to be as efficient as possible with this method and get as many cases run in a week as possible. And so we basically try to make sure we run them as fast as we get them and get those profiles out so that Carla's team and law enforcement can do the genealogy necessary in order to be able to make those identifications.
When we were at the Savannah Crime Expo, by the way, we ran into some people that are very into this field and are very interested in working in this field. Are you hiring? Are people going to be added to Carla's team? Carla, we know you're an incredible dynamic person, but I don't know you can do it all by yourself.
Absolutely. I cannot do it all by myself. No, we are building such an amazing team, a robust team that I am so proud of. And we are accepting resumes and looking for the next forensic genealogist to join our team.
So people go to Othram.com and there would be information about new opportunities that might present themselves?
Yes, you can there's a link to job positions that are open on the site on Othram.com. You can click on them, it'll take you to a lever site and you can apply right there. And then Carla will call you for an interview.
From Dubai.
Yep, from Dubai or London or wherever she is at the moment. I often tell her that we're on the opposite side of the world with the exact same purpose and mission. And it's crazy that 2 people from the total other sides of the spectrum ended up being the missing pieces to trying to help with this puzzle. And Carla gave me this the last time I met her, and it's 2 puzzle pieces put together. She actually gave it to me the day that I asked her to join Othram officially. Like she said, she's been part of the project and part of Othram for a very long time, but it was a peripheral part. She loved every part of what we were doing and was one of our largest advocates. And we love everything that she does. Carla does not know how good she is as a genealogist. She is one of the most brilliant people I've ever met. And so I was thrilled to have her join us. And I do feel like it was that last puzzle piece that was needed to truly scale this technology. She's already hired quite a few people on the team in just a little bit of time since August now. Like she said, it's an incredible team with a lot of talent, diverse backgrounds that I truly believe are going to announce even more cases with law enforcement and be able to show even more solves and even more proof that this technology works.
Let the audio record show, this is an audio art form, that these 2 amazing women on either side of the world have matching bracelets.
You're beautiful.
So 2 pieces of the puzzle, and you're solving puzzles every single day, it sounds like.
Producing leads, definitely. We are, like I said, we are building a dynamic team that are so passionate. Each of us, we are filled with passion. And I guarantee you that even though that we might be under contract to put in a certain amount of hours, I guarantee you we're putting in more hours than that. Because we just are so obsessed. We're just a passionate bunch. We love what we do.
It's absolutely true. And honestly, it's all for families of victims that are out there that need to hear these answers. And again, Bill, more than anyone else, but every time I meet a family member, every time I talk to someone that we've been able to bring an investigative lead back to the detectives that they were able to solve the case with, they are so grateful. And there's so much impact, and it's beyond just immediate families. It's communities, it's entire friend groups. It's so many people for each and every case that need to know what happened in order to be able to stop searching for those questions. I would never use the word closure. I think it's impossible to get closure from something like that. I feel like it's a constant pursuit to try to figure out what happened that consumes most of these people's lives that I meet. I can see that when you give them those answers, there's relief. No matter how terrible they are sometimes, no matter how much someone doesn't want to know that their loved one is confirmed deceased or whatever the situation is, it is the truth and it's known. And all of a sudden they're able to just stop searching for that truth. And that's incredible. I've been in the medical field my whole life. I've helped people my whole life. I think most of us here at Othram have tried to help people our whole lives. I've never done anything as impactful as be able to help with one of these cold cases, ever.
Carla, I wanted to ask you something. Obviously, when you're working a case and the missing pieces are, for instance, to identify an unidentified person, so remains or something like that. Sometimes, though, you're also looking for information that may identify a family member as an offender. They may be the killer or perpetrator of some heinous crime. As you're working your way through family trees and building out family trees, and as Kristen Dilley was saying, we pictured this gigantic whiteboard, which is electronic now, of course, but do you ever find yourself at a place where it would make sense to reach out to family members to ask questions about relatives? Can you finesse that, or do you have to remain distanced from those kind of questions?
Definitely, we have to remain distanced, especially when it's dealing with a suspect case. Absolutely, under no circumstance should we reach out to any match when it comes to a criminal investigation. That's just unacceptable. We cannot, absolutely cannot. The only time we would be able to reach out in a DOE match is if we had permission to reach out to an unidentified remains case. But we would not just take it upon ourselves just to reach out, no.
Law enforcement would handle that if the case ever went down those kind of roads. That isn't something that Othram does or that your team does.
Correct.
We have case managers that work really closely with law enforcement from the time that we receive the evidence all the way through to the resolution of the case, even through court. If it has to go to court sometimes, they will communicate what Carla's team figures out, whatever that may be. So if you're stuck in a family tree somewhere and you think getting information here may be helpful or reaching out to someone here may be helpful, then Carla will give that information internally to the team. The case manager will reach out to the law enforcement agency, speak to the law enforcement agent responsible for that investigation, give them all the information, and then they would do whatever they need to do to come back with information for us so that we continue to do what we do. You know, what's amazing about this type of technology is it works a lot better if people are working together to get to the answer. It can be a lot quicker and it's a lot more efficient. And so we're often reaching out all the time to the law enforcement agency and getting their help onto what's next and figuring out what the next step is so that we can get there faster. And we have built great partnerships with many agents.
We know so far that you are working on the missing and murdered Indigenous women. We know about NamUs. Anything else you guys have on your plate? That's certainly full enough, but what else is going on for Othram?
Othram is growing, and there's a ton of projects that are in the go right now that I believe are going to just show mass scale of these solves, not just a few things, entire backlogs. We do have some state projects going on as well that I think are going to show exactly what Mississippi was able to show with Carla, but at, again, a larger scale of cases. We're working through some perpetrator backlogs as well. I think that will be very interesting to see how that unfolds and how quickly those announce, because obviously with perpetrator cases, there's always that court case to think about, this sentencing, this and that. And so sometimes they announce slower. I hope that when people start to see a lot more examples out in the public and in the media, when law enforcement starts to see that down the street, another agency used this to solve their case, it's going to be the spark that, sets the fire, and everyone starts to use this technology. And we start to live in a world where these backlogs are being cleared and people are getting answers all the time about what happened to their loved one. And hopefully live in a world where perpetrators are caught the first time they commit a crime rather than the second, third, or fourth. Live in a world where people start to think twice about committing these crimes and their ability to get away with it. We announced a case in New York, I believe it was yesterday, maybe it was the day before yesterday, where, it's a lot. The murderer went through great lengths to make sure that there were no identifying information left on the body. He decapitated her. He cut off her arms and legs.
Oh, this was a terrible case. Yes.
It's horrible. And we were able to identify her using these types of DNA testing methods. I don't know if you saw the article that got posted right after, but as soon as we identified her, there was a newspaper clipping where her son said that she had written a telegraph saying that she was leaving, but he knew that couldn't be true. And her husband had other wives that had just disappeared. And he obviously was very concerned that something like that was going on. The truth is, in digging into figuring out who the identity of the victim is, now there's going to be a crime solved as well. And that's more often than not the case. Every time we are able to give someone their name back, it leads to an open investigation as to what happened to them. It's almost impossible to be able to figure out what happened to someone if you don't know anything about them. But if you do know the name, you can go back to family members, you can go back to friends, you can piece together what happened the last few weeks of their lives, where they were going, who they were going with, how they ended up in the location where they were found. Often the bodies are discovered in a completely different part of the country, or not even close to where they originated. And then as you piece back the last few weeks of their lives, you're able to start to investigate what happened to them in the crime and identify that perpetrator. There's even been times, I don't know if you saw the Georgia solve recently with the FBI and GBI.
Yes.
But we were able to identify her. And then on her pants, there was a unknown male profile. And so we were able to identify the perpetrator of the crime as well, just using DNA technology and not having to go into the investigative part to figure out who that was. And that was incredible.
In that example, in the Georgia example, that was a twofer then, that you were able to identify the victim positively and then identify the offender. And so you were able to put together leads for the Georgia Bureau of Investigation and the Federal Bureau of Investigation to solve a completely unsolved mystery.
Yeah, and that's rare that you can do that from one crime scene and evidence, but it's incredible when it happens. And I think as this technology starts to be applied to newer crimes, it won't be as rare. So if you had a crime scene, a recent crime scene, and an unidentified person, and you didn't wait decades to test the DNA the evidence that was there, it would be more likely to find that perpetrator DNA at the same time as well. And I know that we've been able to identify a perpetrator from 0.12 nanograms of DNA. That's the equivalent of about 15 human cells. If you touch a surface right now, you've left hundreds of cells. We took 15 human cells from 32 years ago. It was a sex assault murder of a 14-year-old girl in Las Vegas. It was a mixture between perpetrator and victim. And we were still able to identify that perpetrator. And he actually, when CODIS confirmed that result, he led to yet another crime 3 years before of another woman that he had raped and murdered.
Those cases are so flat out amazing. And I appreciate your talking about how small the required amount of DNA is now. And this is where your reminder earlier, Kristen, about sometimes we need to be patient. I don't want to get ahead of myself in the New York case, but I remember reading that so much has already come together about that woman and her life. And I was thinking about something, which is without identifying a victim, you cannot have any victimology. Now that we know who this woman was. And I've already seen articles that the last time she was seen was at the hair salon where she worked in New York. And it's now coming together. Her story begins to build because we can build a story now that we know who she is. I'm pretty confident that there will be an identified perpetrator in that story. I think they will identify an offender. I don't know if it'll happen between now and 2 weeks from now when this podcast runs, but I believe it will happen because there's so much more for law enforcement to work with now as a result of identifying these unidentified remains.
Absolutely. And most of these cases end up resolving and figuring out who the perpetrator is. And some of them take a longer time than others. But like you said, every time the name is back, people know what happened and the last time they saw that person and where, and they call in the number that's given in these DNA Solves articles, and they're able to provide those context cues that are necessary to piece together that person's end of life. That person deserves their story told. They deserve to be matched back to family, and they deserve justice. And it really is technology that is bringing back answers and being able to set the truth of what happened at a crime scene in a very powerful way. I'm thrilled to be even a small part of it. I know Carla feels much the same. I know everyone at Othram feels much the same. And you guys, media is hugely important in educating the public about new technology, about how to think about new technology, how to think about these cases. And I feel like all of us work together towards this one common goal will leave the world a safer and better place for it.
I can't think of a better note to end on than that. Carla, do you have any final thoughts before we close out our session today?
I think that Kristen said it perfectly. I just like to remind everyone, it's about the families. We owe it to the families to give them answers. They have waited so long, just as Bill has waited over, did you say 37 years?
36 years
36.
This October 2022.
And there are so many people like you. It's time that they have those answers that they deserve. It's time that the victims are identified. We have the technology. It's here. It's now. So this is what, if there's evidence out there, send it to Othram, because having a profile, even if it's not solved at this moment, building that profile and having it in the database preserves that evidence. I encourage every agency to think about that for the sake of their case and for the families of the victims.
We hope they certainly do take that into account moving forward. Carla, Kristen, thank you so much for joining us. It's a pleasure to talk to you as always, and we look forward to seeing you. I guess CrimeCon is going to be the next time we're all together, yeah?
Maybe we'll come see you before that. I'm thinking the temperatures over there sound better than mine. I'm hopping a plane soon. No, I'm just kidding.
We are finally getting fall here, but yeah, it sounds like you guys are still right in the middle of summer. Thank you so much for joining us for this episode of Mind Over Murder. We'll see you next time.
That evidence. I encourage every agency to think about that for the sake of their case and for the families of the victims.
We hope they certainly do take that into account moving forward. Carla, Kristen, thank you so much for joining us. It's a pleasure to talk to you as always, and we look forward to seeing you. I guess CrimeCon is going to be the next time we're all together, yeah?
Maybe we'll come see you before that. I'm thinking the temperatures over there sound better than mine. I'm hopping a plane soon. No, I'm just kidding.
We are finally getting fall here, but yeah, it sounds like you guys are still right in the middle of summer. Thank you so much for joining us for this episode of Mind Over Murder. We'll see you next time.
Mind Over Murder is a production of Absolute Zero and Another Dog Productions.
Our executive producers are Bill Thomas and Kristen Dilley.
Our logo art is by Pamela Arnois.
Our theme music is by Kevin MacLeod.
Mind Over Murder is distributed in partnership with Crawlspace Media.
You can follow us on Facebook, Twitter, or Instagram.
You can also follow our page on the Colonial Parkway Murders on Facebook.
And finally, you can follow Bill Thomas on Twitter at BillThomas56.
Thank you for listening to Mind Over Murder.